Issuing its third major recall in a little over a month over unsafe toys made in China. The new recall involves 775,000 products which contain unsafe levels of lead paint, including Barbie accessories, the Geotrax locomotive line, and Bongo Band toys. Shares of Mattel were down more than 3% earlier in the session, settling out there, well, to the plus side. And after hours trading, we could see at $22. The Wall Street Journal's Lee Hawkins has more on the growing problems with Chinese-made products. Lee?
Melissa, the reliability of American goods is now focused on Mattel, but it's not an isolated case. Analysts say that in the coming months, even more American companies will recall products manufactured in China. Mattel is taking a $30 million charge in the second quarter, cutting into the sales of Mattel's legendary Barbie line and adding fuel to the Made in China debate, just in time for the Christmas retail season. Beyond Mattel, analysts say almost every American company manufacturing goods in China has relationships with dozens of Chinese suppliers, and some fall short of Western standards. As the Chinese market matures, the list of Chinese suppliers is getting bigger, making it even harder to detect potential problems.
This problem isn't easy to solve. It's not over. It's buried deep in the supply chain into China, into the second and third tier suppliers, and that's hard to fix. It's a China problem, it's a Mattel problem, it's a toy industry problem, and it's a problem for anybody sourcing in China.
And that means American companies have to reevaluate the way they inspect products coming into the U.S. from China.
Somewhere in that audit process, obviously, they're not catching issues that they should have caught, and so this is something that they're going to have to step up and figure out what went wrong with their audit process.
What's really interesting about this is Mattel was actually one of the first toy companies to manufacture in China. It was also among the first companies to perform quality control audits on imported goods. But for whatever reason, these audits are not working, and analysts expect Mattel will launch an investigation into this within the coming weeks. Melissa, back to you.
Maybe it's become too big to handle. All right, Lee Hawkins, thanks so much. It is becoming a familiar scenario for toy maker Mattel with its third recall of Chinese-made toys this summer. In a full-page ad in today's New York Times, the company pledging to ensure safer products. But who's really to blame in this ongoing battle, U.S. corporations or China? Product liability attorney Joe Price says corporations bear majority of the responsibility. Well, UC Irvine business professor Peter Navarro says blame China. He's also the author of The Coming China Wars. Joe, let me start with you because I talked to a woman who manufactures her company's products in China recently, pet beds. She said her margins are terrific, but she's over there in the factories all the time policing them. She thinks it's up to the companies. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think to a certain extent, Melissa, the companies have a responsibility to ensure the quality control, the quality assurance. And to do that, you have to be on the ground. You can't delegate that to somebody thousands of miles away. So I think being there, talking to people, seeing the facilities, and having rigid quality control and quality assurance procedures is what they need.
Peter, what do you think about that?
Well, Mattel's an interesting case. I mean, it's logged more years in China than most other corporations. It seems to do everything right there, and it's still got nailed. That's what's scary here. And if you look at the statistics, Chinese goods consistently have a higher rate of failure or defective issues than products from other places, and that's why I believe it's primarily a problem that starts in China. You have basically a corrupt government, you have lax regulatory issues, and you have entrepreneurs in the supply chain that are willing to cut corners. That said, you also have big corporations like Walmart that put a lot of pressure on the Chinese to lower their costs and prices, and that in turn gets bad behavior over there. It is a China problem, though. It's a distinctly unique China problem.
But Peter, I mean, it's a China problem, but making your products are a lot cheaper there. Isn't it up to the companies to fix it?
Absolutely, and here's what I'm telling corporation executives these days. Basically, you've got to do a much more sophisticated risk assessment. I mean, let's face it, Melissa, these companies go over there for the cheap labor, for the access to the markets, for the lax environmental and health and safety regulations, And basically, they naively assume that China's going to produce basically in the same responsible way as other countries, and nothing could be further from the truth. There's a huge hidden cost to what's going on now in terms of loss of a brand name and goodwill and all sorts of things, and companies really need to reevaluate that risk assessment. It has to be more sophisticated.
Well, that's not the only potential loss. I mean, Joe, you're a product liability attorney. How much risk does Mattel have here?
Well, there's obviously some risk here. Fortunately, there aren't any indications that any child has been seriously injured. But I think one thing we lose sight of is the fact that even with this sort of recurrent publicity about Mattel and the unfortunate problems they've had, the percentage of recalls and the percentage of allegedly defective products is really astonishingly small compared to the total percentage of sales. But Jill, 3 this summer,
I mean, 3 this summer, it just seems like a huge number. And it seems like it's crying out for a class action suit. Whether it's warranted or not, people love to sue. What would you tell Mattel to do right now?
Well, I think Mattel is doing a lot of the best things that they should be doing. I mean, I think they're getting their story out in the publicity in the media. I think they're probably going to be a lot more thoughtful about how they go about making sure that their products are working appropriately, that the products are appropriately painted or what have you. And I think that Mattel will probably be a better company, and I think all manufacturers are going to be better for this unfortunate experience because they're going to start paying more attention to what they have to do.
Melissa, I think Joe's dead wrong about this being an astonishingly small problem. It's a huge problem. I mean, the Chinese say, look, less than 1% failure rates and things like that, but if 1 out of every 100 toys has problems, do you want your kid buying that toy? Well, as we look more closely at this problem, you're going to see more and more industries have these kinds of recalls, and it's going to ultimately be a damper on the economy, on the stock market, and on the companies that have a disproportionate share in China in terms of outsourcing.
All right, gentlemen, we've got to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Let's go to Larry Kudlow and find out what's coming up on Kudlow & Company. Larry?